All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're talking about the Berlin Airlift. And look, this was so much more than just a historical event. It was one of the most audacious, high-stakes operations of the entire 20th century. We're talking about the first real showdown of the Cold War, a logistical marvel that shouldn't have been possible, and a powerful symbol of defiance when all hope seemed lost.
So I want you to just think about this for a second. How do you save a city of 2 million people from the sky? That's not a riddle. That was the actual impossible choice the Western Allies faced back in 1948. Their options: Option 1, abandon 2 million people to Soviet control. Or Option 2, risk starting World War III. Yeah, not great. But their solution? Well, it was something nobody saw coming.
So how did we even get to a point where this was a real problem? To get that, you've got to look at the map of Germany right after World War II. It was, and I'm not exaggerating here, a geopolitical tinderbox just waiting for a spark. And the city of Berlin? It was sitting right on top of the fuse.
You really have to get your head around how strange this setup was. Okay, so after the war, the Allies carve up Germany into 4 zones, right? One for the US, one for the UK, one for France, and one for the Soviet Union. Simple enough. But here's the kicker. Berlin, the capital, was deep inside the Soviet zone. And what did they do with Berlin? They split it 4 ways too. So you end up with this tiny little island of Western democracy, completely surrounded by a massive sea of Soviet-controlled territory. It was a recipe for disaster.
And at the heart of it all was this fundamental clash of ideas. I mean, they were on completely different planets. The Western powers, they wanted to rebuild Germany's economy, get things running again, and establish a stable democracy. The Soviet Union, under Stalin? No. Their goal was total control and spreading communism. There was just no way these 2 visions for Germany's future could coexist peacefully.
So you've got this pot just simmering with tension, and it was about to boil over. Big time. The Soviets decided it was time to make their move. They were going to turn Berlin from just a point of tension into the first real battleground of the Cold War. And when it happened fast. Like incredibly fast. The Western Allies introduced a new stable currency, the Deutschmark, to help Germany get back on its feet. The Soviets? They saw this as a direct threat to their economic control. So on June 24, 1948, they played their trump card. They cut the city off. A full blockade.
Just like that, overnight, 2 million people in West Berlin were completely cut off. Think about that. No more food coming in. No coal for heat and electricity. No medicine. They were effectively hostages in their own city, and winter was just around the corner.
And let's be clear, this wasn't a military invasion with tanks rolling in. It was a siege, pure and simple. The Soviets just shut down everything. Every road, every railway, every single canal leading into West Berlin was blocked. Stalin's goal was brutally simple: starve the city into submission and force the Western Allies to pack up and leave.
But the Allies didn't blink. They didn't retreat. Instead, they came up with a plan that was so ambitious, so, frankly, unbelievable, it sounds like something out of a movie. They decided, okay, if we can't go through the blockade, we'll go over it.
The Americans called it Operation Vittles. The British called it Operation Plainfare. And you want to hear something crazy? The first planes took off just 2 days after the blockade started. Not 2 weeks, not 2 months, 2 days. That's how fast they moved. It was an immediate, decisive, and incredibly bold answer.
Now, the concept was pretty simple, but the execution was staggeringly complex. The idea was to use fleets of cargo planes flying 24/7 to bring in supplies. They had to use these 3 really narrow air corridors that were guaranteed by a treaty from after the war. That's it. That was the plan. Keep a city of 2 million people alive with nothing but airplanes.
Pulling this off, though, it required a masterpiece of logistics and a level of sheer determination that just defied all expectations. I mean, the scale of this whole thing was just mind-boggling.
Let's just talk about the numbers for a second, because they're absolutely insane. Over the course of almost a year, Allied planes flew in 2.3 million tons of supplies. We're talking everything from food and medicine to the giant sacks of coal they needed to power the entire city and get through a brutal winter. All of it, by air.
And to make that happen, they had to fly a constant, non-stop stream of planes. Day and night, good weather, bad weather, it didn't matter. The planes kept coming. In total, it was more than 250,000 separate flights. And every single one of those flights was a journey of defiance, flying right into Soviet-controlled airspace.
And they got so good at it, so precise, that at the peak of the airlift, a plane was landing in Berlin every 30 seconds. Just think about that. It was like a perfectly choreographed aerial ballet, a constant, roaring lifeline to a city that was being starved. The absolute peak, the moment that really showed what they could do, was an event they called the Easter Parade. On that day, in just 24 hours, they flew in almost 13,000 tons of supplies. That was the mic drop. That was the moment that proved to the Soviets and to the whole world that this airlift wasn't just a temporary fix, it was sustainable. They could do this forever if they had to.
But this whole operation wasn't just about tons of coal and sacks of flour. It had this incredibly human side too. There was this one American pilot, Gail Halvorsen. He started taking his candy rations and tying them to little handkerchief parachutes and dropping them down to the kids who would gather to watch the planes land. They started calling him the Candy Bomber. He became this amazing symbol that the Allies weren't just delivering supplies, they were delivering hope.
In the end, the airlift was a stunning, unqualified success. It completely reshaped the geopolitical map. The Soviet Union had made a huge gamble, and they had lost, big time. And the consequences of that loss would define world politics for the next 40 years.
So, after 11 long months, Stalin finally had to admit defeat. On May 12, 1949, the Soviets lifted the blockade. The roads, the railways, the canals, they were all reopened. The airlift had won. But, and I love this part, the Western powers kept the planes flying until September anyway. Why? Just to build up a massive stockpile of supplies in the city. They were sending a crystal clear message. Don't even think about trying this again.
So what was the long-term fallout from all this? Well, there were three huge things. First, it pretty much sealed the deal on Germany being divided. You got West Germany, a democracy, and East Germany, a communist state. Second, it just shattered any last bit of hope for post-war cooperation between the East and West. The lines were drawn and the Cold War was on. And third, it directly led to the creation of NATO. The Western powers realized they needed a formal military alliance to stand together against any future Soviet threats.
So yeah, the airlift was an incredible logistical achievement, but it was more than that. It was a massive moral victory for the West. It became this powerful, enduring symbol of what it meant to stand up for freedom against aggression. And that's a story that echoed all the way through the Cold War.
So, there's no doubt the airlift was a huge triumph for freedom, for human ingenuity, for sheer determination. But it also leaves us with a pretty complex question, right? In the act of saving West Berlin, did the Allies also accidentally cement the division of Europe? Did this victory lock the world into a 40-year-long confrontation that would eventually give us the Berlin Wall? It's something to think about. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.